Very close friend to the channel, Eric K, and I were talking a while back about what would be a good topic to cover on another video for wrestling magazines, and that was to take a look back at some of the muscle men from the 60s and 70s. We're going to pull it back to even the 40s. So we're going to cover a wide spectrum of years. We're going to jump up and back, forward from the 50s, 40s, 30s. A couple guys from the 80s. We're going to cut it off about 85 or 86 or so, because by that point everybody was roided out. They were all jacked up, so it really didn't make a difference. But back in the day, a wrestler who was big and jacked up in muscles was kind of rare. And we're going to touch on a few of these guys. A few of them you may have never heard of before, and hopefully I can bring some attention to. And a couple guys, of course, everybody has heard of that. So thanks to Eric K for the suggestion on this video, which I thought would be a good topic, and actually one of my favorites. So just as the magazine says on the cover of Wrestling Superstars, Summer of '84, wrestling's magnificent muscle men, the most powerful athletes in the world. And by this point in '84, it hasn't really, the steroid scandal from the WWF had not taken place yet. And not to say there wasn't steroids in wrestling, because there absolutely was. But it wasn't a big issue like it would turn out to be. But so touching on this topic, we're going to dial it all the way back to one of the very first few covers when the magazine started in 1951. This is a 1952 issue of the Stanley Brothers. We're going to focus on mostly Mr. America, Gene Stanley. And Gene had a hell of a build back in the 40s and the 50s. Many people mistaken him for Buddy Rogers. He looked a lot like Buddy Rogers, only he was a lot more cut. It's a shame that he's not on more magazines, because he was something else. He was on a lot of program magazines and local magazines, but he wasn't on the mass produced magazines that much. And it's a shame, because by the time, from 1951 is when magazines first started. So prior to that, there wasn't a whole lot of coverage for him for the masses, except for maybe some Wrestling Life issues and those small independent ones. NWA Official would cover Gene Stanley on the cover, but he's covered up, which is, again, you can't see the build on him. I wanted to include him because he had such a great body for this time period, and no one was built like that. Even though you really can't see it, I mean, here he is getting punched in the face by Primo Carnera, who was the former heavyweight boxing champion of the world. He's getting slugged. A lot of people thought that was Buddy Rogers. It's not. And this is May of '83's issue of Wrestling, just Wrestling magazine. And it is Stanley getting socked in the mouth. Sadly, that'll do it for the covers he's on. He's in a small corner shot of here of Guy Lebeau's book in 1950. And I'm going to go to a page here just to show you what he looked like. And here is Gene Stanley here in 1946, I believe the article said. But just a tremendous physique. Built well, I mean, chiseled from top to bottom, totally natural, achievable look. No chemicals, not even like the diets so much as say even kind of the proteins and steroids and stuff like that. Back then, like, the diets were completely different. A lot of that had to do with more like genetics and how the way you were made up, you're personally to be built like that. But this guy was totally ripped for his day, and great covers. And this book covers him pretty much several pages in here. This is actually a really good book if you're like old wrestling. This was put out in 1950, so it covers from like the 20s and to the 50s. So it's not past 50, so you have to be like an old school wrestling fan to enjoy that. A lot of good history in that magazine. 1953, here's a shot of Mildred Burke, who was bigger than some of the men, and today even, she's double the size as some of the so-called men that wrestle today. Some of the guys that look like, grade school kids wrestling today, it's quite embarrassing. Mildred Burke had some guns on her. She had big legs, big shoulders, big biceps. This is one of the early covers that were painted. It was, taken in black and white, but they painted the color in. Here's just another black and white shot of her, and you can just see, it's hard to tell through the lens, through the camera here, but she is kind of cut up in the shoulders and chest and the leg area. August of 1966 also covers her. flexing on the cover of the magazine with the World's Women's Championship belt, which she held from 1936 to 1953. But interesting enough, on the cover here, Mark Lewin, on one of the very few covers that the Maniac happened to be on in August of '66 Wrestling Review, Mark Lewin was jacked when he was like in his 40s and 50s, and still into his 60s. He was still powerlifting and huge. Somebody you never hear much about. You hear about him a little bit resurging with Kevin Sullivan in the 80s when in Florida Championship Wrestling. He was huge then. The guns and chest on the guy was enormous. And like I said, from last I've seen, it wasn't long ago when he was still around. He was still jacked and built at his age. It's unbelievable. We're going to take another look at Mark again later on down the line. And here's just another shot at Mildred again, and this one has her in color for the first time. This is the cover of the very first Wrestler issue in 1966 October, and you can just see the cut on her, the definition in her lats and in her shoulders and triceps there, and also through her legs and calves. Put together woman for sure. Here is an old 1955 issue of Referee Arena magazine, which covered wrestling and also boxing at different times. But it's an early shot of Bobo Brazil, and he was quite put together. He was a huge man in general, but in his early years, here in January of '55, so this photo was taken sometime in '54, Bobo was a big dude, man. Big arms and chest, broad shoulders on him, a towering dude, and all through even through the 60s and the 70s, even when he was, I shouldn't say out of shape, you'll see he was just as big and thick. Here he is in '72. Don Leo Jonathan, who was a giant back then. I mean, he was pretty big for his size and not really giant muscle wise, but just natural thickness and girth. Same goes for Bobo here, man. You can still see he's got the pecs and the shoulders, and just a big, strong guy. Another good shot of him after winning the Sheik's U.S. title, and just both hands on the hips, and you can see the delts and the tris and the pecs on him. Almost got that V-shaped form. Back then, professional wrestlers really were built a lot different, like a big barrel chest and a big round belly to go with it, and there was like no V hourglass look. They were just meant to be big and thick and heavy, and very few guys were toned and had nice muscle cutness to them. And in the early on, man, some of these guys are built beautifully. They just don't show them on the cover of a magazine, which sucks. So that's the whole topic here, is to show you a magazine cover with that guy. So sadly enough, I mean, here's another shot of Bobo. You can just see the size as he's squeezing crazy Luke Graham's head. Just the size of that shoulders and arms, man. He's just massive, just a giant dude. Buddy Rogers, now, who was also very chiseled, had an incredible Greek god build in the 50s and 60s. Picked up where Gene Stanley left off, and he would just, in the beginning, Buddy was quite skinny, and as he packed on some size and some muscle, here he is in 1954, he would just become an Adonis. I mean, like I said before, this is like the greatest looking wrestling magazine of all time. Just look at that tan, the chiseled chin and the jawline and the muscular frame. It just doesn't get much better than this cover right here of Nature Boy as the world champion. Once again, Buddy Rogers, and he would stay in shape all the way through his career until after he retired, almost till his death in '91, I believe, when he was getting ready to come out for a match with Nature Boy Buddy Landel. He was in incredible shape. The magazine covered his last, which would be his last match, would be his latest photo, and he was shredded still to that day. It's a guy who really took physical fitness serious. Here he is again, December of '63. Buddy Rogers at the poolside, all oiled up and jacked up for sure. All, I'm quite sure, naturally built and natural strength. Here he is again on the cover with Carpentier in December of '62, and you could see the form into his chest, the six-pack abs when he's not even trying, the big thick legs on him. Buddy Rogers was definitely the total package. Buddy Rogers would go an hour and a half draw with the incredibly chiseled Dory Dixon. Dory Dixon here on the cover of one of his only magazine covers, and it's a shame. Dory Dixon was jacked and shredded. There's not much to show you on him. I wish I had more. I wish there was more. Not that I don't have more, there is no more, or I'd have it, I'd show you. Look him up, try to Google Dixon and see the size of this dude. He went to a 90-minute draw with Buddy Rogers, each pinning each other for the WWF title at the time. And this is Buddy Rogers here going against Dixon. This magazine covers that match and several others with Dixon. He was definitely put together. Of course, Bruno Sammartino, not the most defined and cut, but certainly the thickest and the strongest. They were calling him right here on the bottom, the Italian Superman. And this is Bruno Sammartino's very first magazine cover on Wrestling Life in 1960 of March. And this issue, if you can find it and are into Bruno, you definitely want to track this one down. It's the first article printed on him in his career, because he was just wrestling when this came out in March, so he made his debut in December. So 3 months, 4 months tops as a pro by this point. And it's the first big article on Bruno, and definitely search this out. It's got a lot of rare pictures of him training, weight training, and some interviews that they did for a sports radio show that he was jacked up on, really cut up and defined early on. He, as he got older, some of the definition kind of went away, but he was still big and still strong. This was his first cover as world champion after winning the WWF title from Buddy Rogers. This is February '64, and we explained this early on. Indian head belt from the interim belt style from the WWF. Another great shot of Bruno in a classic wrestling pose, just big, enormous. You see his traps on him. Once again, here featured with Lou Thesz. You get to see the size. You know, Lou Thesz kind of looks like a turtle out of the shell compared to Bruno, with the size and the shoulders and the massive chest on him. Not taking anything away from Lou Thesz. The guy was in tremendous shape, tremendous physical condition, stamina. His cardio was off the hook, and he knew every single wrestling hold, legit wrestling hold that there was. It would have been a good match for him and Bruno if it were real. Again, Bruno, just another shot of him, all jacked and on the cover of Tri-State Wrestling. A couple more of Bruno just to get through a couple here. Again, October of 1970. With Bruno, even up to his late 70s, or late in his title run in the 70s, I should say, 77, one of the last magazines you'd see Bruno on the cover as champion, and he's still looking big and strong as his retirement approaches in 1980, still physically fit, a little leaner in the belly, a little bit bigger in the shoulders and chest, still looking tremendous. And of course, in 83, 84, when Bruno would make a comeback, he was just as big and just as strong. And to the day he died, he was still in the gym, hitting the weights, still a massive amount of muscle on the guy. He was a total lifetime dedication to lifting and training. Moving on to next, October 70s issue of Wrestling Review. Got to look at Dick the Bruiser, who just has that typical mean, nasty looking Marine type guy with the short buzzed haircut and the gigantic chest. Almost looks like a 70-inch chest. I mean, he's just enormous. I mean, he's got grapefruits for traps. He's just big, mean, and nasty. It's a shame he's the world champion here, and they're not showing the belt. It's awful blacked out, which is a sin for him to be on which could have been a Pro Wrestling Illustrated quality cover had they had gotten this picture a little bit better. But he was a massive dude, and here he is again with that chest and that look. Just a guy you just don't want to fuck with look. I mean, it's just enormous. He would carry that size with him throughout his career, through the early 80s when he had retired. His longtime friend, partner, tag team partner, The Crusher, equally, just a little bit smaller, but these were like the first two giant tag teams. The next two I would think would be the Road Warriors, who would be closer to these two guys as in strength and muscle size and mass, especially where we're talking the 60s and 70s. You can't compare the 80s and what the diets and the proteins were then, if you catch what I'm saying. So it's totally different. You can't really compare the two. But for this time period, these guys were enormous. Don Leo, like we said earlier, here's a guy who's 6'9", 6'10", 320 pounds. Early shot of him in 1961 when he was just lean and mean and thick, big chested. There's another one of him a good 10 years later taking on Jean Ferret, who was Andre the Giant. Again, 6'9", and you could just see the natural size in this guy, and it's just a big, impressive, mean-looking dude. Here's one that most of the people in this channel will know, but anyone who was a novice in their professional wrestling would not have heard of the Mighty Igor. And before he would have the silly, friendly Polish act and the big belly on him, the guy was pretty put together. This is him in 1966 and 67 before he would catch on in the early 70s with his gimmick. And definitely put together, the big chest and shoulders and tremendous size thighs on the dude. The calves were enormous for quite a short guy. And he's somebody, Ivan Putski kind of pretty much stole his act early on, and then before Putski got pretty big. Here's another one that not many have probably heard of, and that's an absolute sin, because this guy probably had the best body in the 1960s. Earl Maynard, Mr. Universe, Earl Maynard. And my God, this dude, I would Google search the guy just to get some more pictures of him, because this guy was jacked and cut. Tremendous chest, triceps, biceps, shoulders, down to the legs. Is a guy you never really heard much of. He was Mr. Europe, Mr. England, Mr. America, finally Mr. Universe. Won the titles everywhere he went. Even went on to star in some TV and film shows, I believe, later on. Had a good wrestling career. Would wrestle till, I don't know, the early 70s or so, and then went on to films. But this guy was jacked. Here he is again in a small corner shot here. Earl Maynard's muscles to fame, and you could just see the definition of this dude and the chest on him. Just absolutely awesome looking build for 1960s. Early 1970, he would team up with Mil Mascaras, who also had a chiseled physique. M&M was the tag team, Mascaras and Maynard, and this is September of 1971 Wrestling Review, and you can check out Maynard and Mascaras in this issue. And it's a shame that he wasn't on more magazines, because the guy, like I said, was built beyond belief. There's a good article in here about him if you want to learn more about him. Also, Rocky Johnson, who we're going to look at again later on, had a tremendous build in the 80s. He was big in the 70s too, but way more so in like 83 and 84. It's ridiculous. But one of you guys had asked me a long time ago, there was an issue when they made a movie about Gorgeous George, and it was played by Henry Winkler, and this is the magazine, November of 78's issue of Big Book that has the photos of Henry Winkler playing Gorgeous George in that movie. So it took me some time to find it. This is it. I had no idea what issue it was in, but I said if I ever came across it, I would mention it, and the perfect time to mention it was now, because it covers Maynard, Rocky Johnson, and the Fonz. Rocky Johnson here was the former America's heavyweight champion in NWA Hollywood, and here's a great shot of him in 1970 on the cover of the Olympic Auditorium's wrestling program called The Grappler. It's a magazine/program. Rocky was not on many magazines at all. Here he is on March of 1977. Now I'm talking issues with him just standing there. There's a couple with him wrestling, but you don't get to see, his definition and the build on him. Here he is with Jose Lothario, but he's not, he's big. He's still, massive. He's still got muscles here, but he's not what he would become in 1983. Holy shit. I mean, he was beyond jacked, and it's something that's not really ever talked about that much. You know, Tony Atlas gets a lot of the credit, but man, you know, Rocky Johnson was one shredded dude in the early 80s. Mil Mascaras, of course, had the most incredible bodies of any Mexican wrestler and 90% of any other wrestler out there, for sure. Without a doubt, besides his brother becoming a very close second, Dos Caras, with his build as well. We'll look at him in 1 second. But here's Mil, of course, winning many bodybuilding titles. Apparently, I don't know where. That's just what the magazines say. I don't know what the actual titles that he held were, if at all. I'm sure, you know, he would have to take his mask off. I don't think he would have done that. It could be kayfabe, but he could have. Early issues of Mascaras in 1972. This is signed by Terry Funk, and rest in peace, Terry Funk. Man, you know, we just lost him a couple of days ago. What a shame. You know, it's just awful. Hate to see the legends go. All the NWA champions are leaving us, and there's only just maybe 1 or 2 left, and it's a shame, man. Again, back to Mascaras, quite big here in summer of 1977. He had that, you know, what an hourglass figure for a man, with the chest and the stomach that just caved into, like, you know, 6 inches thick. He could really suck his gut in and really blow it up on top. He was a big dude. Here he is flexing, sharing the cover with an early superstar, Billy Graham, in 73, Inside Wrestling. Sharing a cover now with Bruno Sammartino. Bruno in his older years here in 76. March of 76, so this is like 75's photo, and a great shot of Mascaras just really ripped here and showing some muscle definition. Another good shot of Mascaras. This is one of his first magazines in the United States. This is definitely the first issue with him posing. Hard issue to find, from what I was told. I'm a big Mascaras fan, so I've had all these forever, but I hear this is a tough issue to find. March of 71. Great cover of Mascaras posing here in March of 72. 1 year later for the wrestler, holding the world title, Mexican world title, above his head on the cover of Boxeo Lucha, and he has got the IWA championship and also the Mexican heavyweight championship in 1975. And we're mentioning his brother Dos. This is his brother. He looks just like him. It's not. People could easily mistake Dos here for his brother Mil, but this is his brother, who was very equal to his build, especially in the 80s. Dos really, you know, was very cut up and very big. Wrestled a lot in Japan, hardly ever in America, a little bit in Los Angeles, but not a whole lot. It was mostly Mexico and Japan for his brother. He had another brother, El Psychedelico, who was also built, but not quite like those two guys. So the one everyone knows, and we'll go through it kind of quickly because everyone knows how big and how trend-setting and how ripped off and copied superstar Billy Graham was, and without a doubt one of my top 3 to 4 favorite wrestlers of all time. Not for his wrestling ability, for his gimmick, for the size and the look and the color and the interview, of course. This is Superstar's very first magazine cover, January 71, autographed by Superstar. And of course, he is posing on the cover, making his very first cover a posed cover. So quite becoming of the Superstar for the ego that he had. And he would continue to pose on more magazine covers than any other wrestler in history. Superstar, July 74. Love this cover of the Superstar. Again here in 75, March. So 74 and 75, I don't think Superstar was ever any bigger. Just look at the size of this bicep, tricep, shoulder, and delt and trap combination. It's just unbelievable. I mean, goddamn, just enormous. Wow. March 75's issue of Inside Wrestling, and man, he is huge right there. This is mentioning Superstar for the first time in the Northeast, coming to the Meadowlands, Brendan Byrne Arena shortly after that. Nassau Coliseum. I'm sorry, this is Nassau Coliseum, not Brendan Byrne. This is Nassau Coliseum out in Long Island, and Superstar is coming to town. And this is your first look at him on a Northeast program for his title run with Bruno. Another shot of Superstar, all jacked up. Of course, he was the Worldwide Wrestling Federation heavyweight champion. And again, just look at that body, look at that build. What an awesome cover. Just look at the size of this dude, man. It's just unbelievable. The biggest arms in wrestling, 24 inches. Many people claim to have 24. None of them did. Came close, of course. Number one was like the Superstar. Without a doubt, the best definition in a bicep from anybody I've ever seen. There was many big guys and many thick guys, but no one had arms like that. He just had the best arms. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger was saying like Superstar had some of the best biceps he'd ever seen. Great shot of a tricep bicep shot of Superstar on Wrestling Yearbook. Another very similar pose from the same photo shoot, but just a different pose for Superstar on this cover with Harley Race, mentioning the Super Bowl of wrestling. Quite a difference in Harley Race's size. He makes up for it in technical wrestling, that's for sure. Another great shot of early 70s, mid-70s Superstar Graham here. And again with the bicep pose. Good shot of him with a Ivan Putski, who's about to make his way into our topic in a minute. This is the Popular Wrestling May of 1978, and Superstar looking enormous here with good shot of the stomach and the chest, and the biceps are just ridiculous. One of my favorite photos of Superstar in Times Square, standing on top of that metal and concrete trash can in the city. Also got Mascaris and Bruno, who were already discussed. So this is an early shot of wrestling's Musclemen all on the cover together. But Superstar just looking absolutely ridiculous. Look at that. This apparently was taken in the wintertime. I think they said it was February or March. So March is freezing in New York. So for him to be there with his shirt off like that, and it drew quite a crowd from what I heard in Apter's book. Definitely a great cover. Superstar would remain his size throughout his career, and here he is in 1980 now with the shaved head, soon to be the karate gimmick after he would take a long 3-year hiatus, and here he is back in Championship Wrestling from Florida as he wins the Florida heavyweight title and still got the same biceps as he did. Short time there, he was off the shit for a while, and like 83 in the WWF, and he looked almost sick. He just looked like thin and bad health. He did not look himself. So he changed his diet and took some training more serious, went down to Florida, captured the Florida title, and he's all ballooned back up again to the Superstar that we all loved, here with Sir Oliver Humperdinck on the cover of a Grapevine magazine/program from Florida. Here he is, cover of Wrestling World. You can still see the veins coming through of a big Superstar Graham, all the way late into his career at the very end on the last couple of magazine issues with him. Here he is again with, we were just saying, Maniac Mark Lewin. Again, you know, heels didn't get a lot of coverage on the covers. If they did, they were usually getting beat up. They usually showcased the faces on the cover. So showing a big heel in the 70s, 60s with their shirt off and looking big was hard. They usually showcased the faces. That's what sold the magazines, so it's tough. So finding big men to show on a cover of a magazine was kind of difficult. It took a long time to pull these out. And Mark Lewin had a great body, man. It's a shame that he wasn't on a few more covers. Not many people know who Mark was. And Superstar on his very last magazine cover, Wrestling Power, January 88, and we discussed this in the Graham video. This was a match that he let Johnny Rods go over in the Bronx. Taking a look here at Ivan Putski for the first time, but not quite. Let's look over at who? The American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. Look at the size of this dude. The big fat man, as we come to know him. Before all that, 1977 and 76, Dusty was in some decent shape. I mean, he's got a broad chest, he got a tight shirt that's form-fitting, he got a little V action in the lats and stomach area. The triceps and the biceps looked nice and formed. Looks really good here, even though he's in a yellow Superman shirt, which is supposed to be the other color. But we're looking at Ivan Putski, and he's taking on Ken Patera here, who are both would become huge muscle men in just a couple short years from now. Not saying that they're small now, but they get way more cut as the time goes on. Here's a shot of Putski in 77, talking about the sheer strength and power in Wrestling Training Illustrated. We do a whole video on all the 70s Wrestling Training Illustrated magazines and the publishers of that book, of that magazine. So check out that vid if you haven't already. Here's a great shot. He had some tremendous feuds with Superstar Graham. You're going to see a lot of Putski and Superstar on the magazines. I didn't grab them all, just a couple. Here he is again with Patera once again, and we'll go over Ken in just a few minutes. Here he is now with superstar Billy Graham, and here he's kind of just getting over that gimmick where he had did the same as Mighty Igor, you know, with the hat and then the Polish song and you know, acting silly, and he decided to change his gimmick and put some muscle on, and that was a much better fit for Ivan. And a younger shot in early '76 of Superstar Graham here. Actually, that picture was taken in '75. Again with Superstar Graham, spring of 1978, and he gets starting to pack the muscle on now. He's missing that front tooth. He grew out the beard, so he's changing his look. And again, in the 80s, now in The Wrestler, Putski still making the covers. Another shot of him posing on the cover of Wrestling Stars of the 80s. And probably your best look at Putski in November 1980, and he's just shredded and muscled up on this one. He's short, compact, very thick. He was my dad's favorite wrestler. I've always liked Putski too. He was great to see him live, because he was always in like the local towns, and he would always be like a main event. He would go. I remember seeing him against Snuka, against the Executioner a couple different times. Blackjack Mulligan, what a match that was, because there was such a height difference, but he made up for it in strength. Moving on, we're taking a look at Ricky Steamboat, who, this magazine is out of order. This is January '83, but he's probably his biggest in '83 right here. He has really put together giant biceps, triceps, and chest of Ricky Steamboat here. Here is one of his first covers, not exactly the first, but close to it, when he was the U.S. heavyweight champion, and better shot because it's autographed and it kind of blocked his build here. But great shot, great physique of Ricky Steamboat, who just had a match with Ric Flair about a year ago. Or no, he didn't. He just had a comeback match as Ric Flair did about a year ago, and the guy was still put together. Absolutely awesome. He was supposed to go against Flair. I thought they were trying to make that match, but it never happened. And Steamboat would have blew him out, so it's better off that he didn't, because Steamboat looks great here in 1979, just as he looks great today. Still takes care of himself. Early shot of him on the cover with Harley Race. They would have several matches together. And in March of 1980, here he is on the cover with Race. He would continue on throughout the 80s. Here's newer shots of him in '83 in a tag team match in Japan. He would be teaming up with Mascaras. He would go up against Mascaras a couple of times, and Dos Caras as well, his brother. Steamboat on the cover of PWI, October of '85, still looking chiseled and cut. And of course, you can't have a muscle man without mentioning Hulk Hogan. We all know Hulk Hogan. We all know his size and his strengths, and all the magazines he was on. We're just going to cover a couple of quick issues, a couple early issues of him in the early 80s, 80, 81, 82. Here he is on the cover with Putski, both power men in his WWF run with Hogan. Again in 1980 with, 81 with Putski, another rare shot of Hogan. Not this couple issues you don't see very much. Hard to get those early Wrestling World issues. August of 1980, and he's coming after Bob Backlund's title. And this is Sports Review. Another early 81 issue. Hogan on his way to the AWA. Hogan on the cover of the first WWF magazine, and of course he was big and thick. He would carry that throughout his career, of course. A lot of people would say, oh, Hogan got off of the steroids, he's all skinny now. Hogan was never off steroids. Even when he got skinnier, he was still on steroids. I know a lot about steroids. I've used steroids myself. I know exactly how it works. There's stuff that make you big, there's stuff that make you cut, and there's stuff to make you big and cut. And he just changed his stuff around and changed his diet around. So rather than put on a lot of thick, heavy bulk and girth, he was doing some stuff to make him get cut up, and you can see the muscle definition in him very late in his career. 1999, it looks better than he did ever. The same can be said about Scott Steiner. Here's a guy who's big and he's thick, and then all of a sudden he's just ridiculous, this genetic freak. And whether it's put together in a syringe or in a diet, you still got to put the man hours in, and you still got to work the hell out of yourself. It isn't like you just take steroids and you just get big. You have got to really, really work hard to get it. So it isn't, oh yeah, he's on the shit. He's on the ship, but it doesn't take away from the amount of hours he put in and to get that size. It just does not happen just because you take something. You really got to fight to put that in there and to get that look, and he certainly did. I mean, look at the size of the dude. He looks better than ever late in his career. Here he is again in 2003 on the cover of a Jap issue, Pro Wrestling Weekly, and still got the guns. He's got the veins. He never had veins in the 80s, and now he's got them in his older age. He's just taking different stuff and getting built up, and looked great, according I thought anyway. Thought he looked awesome. Another muscle man, not mentioned very much, the Canadian strongman, the Canadian champion, Dino Bravo, and he's on the cover of Spring 1979, and not the biggest here. I mean, of course, he got to the WWF and he ballooned up like everybody else did, so there wasn't much of a feat. Everyone was jacked by that point. But early Dino Bravo looked fantastic in the 78 and 79. Cover of Wrestling Yearbook. Also Steamboat on this cover, looking really fine too, with the chiseled up chest and biceps. Dino Bravo again with Ric Flair. Notice how we're putting him together in 79. They're trying to give him a push. So they put him with some of the biggest names at the time. Dusty Rhodes, Andre the Giant, Ric Flair. So, you want to get somebody over in the magazines, put them on the cover with some of the bigger people, and people will start to take notice. And that was like how you got noticed more so than anything else, because there was no internet, no magazines were covering you like sports magazines, only wrestling. So this was, the way to get him over, and was a big star in the WWF when he came. Huge in Canada. Canadian people loved him, and were sad to see when his company closed. Ken Patera, another big, strong, powerful Olympic champion, and this is June of 1977 with the Olympic symbol on his tights, and he is in the WWF at this point, taking on Backlund, and he's not that muscular. I mean, he's big, he's strong, he's not quite what he would become later on, but early on he was just your average big, thick, strong powerhouse wrestler. And then in the 80s, of course, now you can see the muscle definition and the tone in his biceps and triceps and chest totally cut. Totally changed diet and exercise and training mentality for him in the 80s, and that would carry on throughout up until he went to prison. And then when he came out of prison, he was still big and strong, but never quite like the 1980-81 Patera, that's for sure. Great shot of him with Kevin Von Erich on Kevin's first title. This is the match where he wins the Missouri title. Mr. USA, Tony Atlas, whether that's a real claim or not, whether he actually won Mr. USA or not, I don't know, but that is definitely his nickname. And he had a tremendous physique. I mean, look at the size of this guy. Lats, tries, buys, traps, everything. Abs, the guy was just put together from here up. And the bottom, the guys say his legs were skinny, this and that. I mean, here he is in 81, he's a pretty big dude. Pressing 300-pound Hulk Hogan right over his head. Great set of six-pack abs. You can see the definition in the thighs here. Atlas was a big, strong dude, and still big today. Still got the guns. Just seen an interview of him on YouTube not long ago with got a gray hair, this and that. But I mean, he's an older man, but he's still gigantic. This is August 81. Press slamming Hogan over his head. Atlas in 83 taking on Flair for the NWA World title. Mr. USA taking on, I'm not sure who that is. It looks like Johnny Rodz. It's not. I'm going to say Israel Mattia maybe, which is weird to find a job guy on the cover. February 1984 of Wrestling World, and Mr. USA looking really big here. Good bloody shot of Tony Atlas in 1981 on Sports Review, April. Real gigantic chest on him. It's signed by Tony. You're seeing not really clear because of the signature is kind of blocking it a little bit. Spring of 84, probably the biggest I'd ever see Atlas in this chest. It's just ridiculous. I mean, it looks like two bald men's heads for chests. Unbelievable. he would have some great matches. He would gain the nickname Bony Tony Atlas, and I remember in the Philly Spectrum going to see Atlas and Jesse, and about 8 of us all went, and we're all, got the Bony Tony chant going. No one else would catch on to it, but just us few guys. We had a great time, and it was cool. He had a steel cage match with Atlas. He had him beat. He gets on top of the steel cage and he starts flexing, and then Tony, from what I remember, grabs him, pulls him down, and then escapes the cage and wins. And we were all pissed because Jesse lost. That's good times back then. Jesse and Adrian Adonis together, June of 1982. This is Jesse's first and only PWI cover as a wrestler. I say as a wrestler because I'm not sure if he's on a cover. I think he is as an announcer with somebody on one of the later years. Cover of Wrestling World, taking on Backlund for the world title. And here is the program to the match at the Brendan Byrne Arena. Great looking shot of Jesse and Backlund in December of 1981. Jesse again with his tag team champion partner, Adrian Adonis. Magnificent Morocco, quite a difference from the Rock Don Morocco later on, when he was a little sauced up. I shouldn't say a little. I mean, his veins were like as thick as number 2 pencils, for Christ's sake. Looked like he was going to die at any second or explode. He was enormous in like 87, 88. Unbelievable. Before that, 83, when Magnificent Morocco was Intercontinental Champion, you can't look in this picture and tell. The guy was in phenomenal shape. He was just a naturally big, thick, strong guy, very big natural arms, chest. He obviously worked out, not to the point where he was in the late 80s, but the dude had a great looking natural physique, natural build to him, big guy, big Hawaiian guy, and man, would he really sauce up and become enormous later on. But he was always big, he was always strong looking, always admired Morocco as a wrestler. He was great on the mic, he had a great build, and really put together, the kind of guy you just look at, you don't want to fuck with him. Here he is beating Pedro for the Intercontinental belt. And on the cover, once again, sorry about that, I gotta fix this cam here. On the cover of Wrestling World again, this is June of 1984. It's really a sin that I couldn't find a great picture of the Iron Sheik when he was in his prime, because man, he had a tremendous build on him. He had like a belly on him, but it was like a solid, like a keg of beer belly. I mean, it was like the size, it was big, but it was solid. You could tell like he couldn't hurt the guy. He was tight later on, but before that, the guy was put together great. Nice size arms, good definition, natural strength to him. He just had that, it's kind of hard to describe. He was just put together really good, and he doesn't get enough credit for being, as cut and as strong as he was, especially on the magazines, because again, he's a heel and he's not on many covers, so you're not going to see the Sheik posing on the cover of a magazine. But the guy had a tremendous body, extreme strength. When he was swinging those clubs around, those things were no joke. Another one's Paul Orndorff. Not enough covers of Paul Orndorff. Dude was built incredible, jacked and shredded at the same time. It's a shame. I have one other picture of him on a cover later on, but he's not on enough that he deserves a lot more credit for his build. The Sheik turning against his tag team partner Ivan Koloff, who was also big and strong in his day. Another shot of the Sheik again. Just a natural, lean, muscular build in 1983. Davey Boy Smith and the Dynamite Kid, the British Bulldogs. Before they were the British Bulldogs, the Dynamite Kid had a tremendous physique. Early on, he was very skinny. In 1982, he really packed it together, and you can see here as he is the WWF's junior heavyweight champion. He would throw away the championship and form the British Bulldogs with Davey Boy Smith. And here they are, and here he is just 2 years later, and look at the size difference of him here. So, he's still pretty built, but he's not this. He's got oranges for traps. His chest is bulging. His arms and biceps are incredible. Whatever he was doing worked very well for him, and really built him up, especially the Bulldog. I mean, you look at him, later on in like 90, 91, I mean, it was ridiculous, the Bulldog. I mean, he looked like he couldn't fit through your doorway. To me, I don't, that's a little bit too much and too bulky. I prefer a guy who was more, chiseled and cut. But taking nothing away from either one of these two guys, man, they put the hours in the gym, that's for sure, and it paid off because they look fantastic. The two, besides Atlas and Johnson as the tag team champions in the WWF, these were the second biggest muscle guys to hold the tag team titles. And Atlas and Johnson are on no cover at all. And so these are your biggest tag team champions, biggest muscle-wise, rather, on a cover of a magazine. I'm trying to find the date, November 1986, of the Dogs. And here's a great shot of the kid with the bicep and tricep exposed here, looking quite enormous. And you guys look at how little skinny Tully Blanchard is here, man. He's got no frame, no build whatsoever. But it didn't take muscles to fill seats, that's for sure. It took a good mouth and a good wrestling ability. Superfly Jimmy Snuka is a guy who never gets enough credit for being built the way he was. I mean, unbelievable. Him and Rocky Johnson must have been on the same plan in like 82 and 83 because they were enormous. There's not enough photos to show you. Just Google or go back in time and watch some matches when Snuka was a heel when he first came to the WWF in 82 and 83. My God, was he put together, man. You can see it a little bit in these early shots of the Rings wrestling in 1983 February. So this picture was taken in 82, looking really good. Here's a shot. And I remember seeing this match, not this actual match, but Putski and Snuka together at a match in Philly. And man, they were both jacked. I mean, Battle of the Musclemen for sure. They both looked phenomenal in November of 1982. He's taking on Pedro Morales for the Intercontinental title. Again, you really can't see it, but you can. He's not flexing or anything. But later on, you could see some more shots of Snuka. Cover of PWI, his first full cover, and he looks fantastic here. Covered, shredded. Every muscle in his entire body is popped out in this photo. He looks awesome. Same with this one here on the cover of Wrestling 84. Great chest. Look at the size of these traps, man, and the definition between the cut and the just unreal between his pecs, traps, and tris and bis all together in one solid muscle. Just unbelievable. Didn't mean to show. Well, you know what? Here's his flexibility, and you can see the definition in his calves, in his legs, all through his chest, his traps. He's just enormous in this very first issue of Victory Sports Wrestling. Here he is side by side with Hogan, and if you ask me, I think he looks better than Hogan. Way more cut and defined. I mean, look at the muscles on him. Biceps, delts, tris. He's just shredded. Again, in PWI in 85, when he takes on a feud with Piper. All the Von Erichs were built great. Kevin and Kerry, of course, had the best. We're going to blow through a couple of these of the Von Erichs. Kevin was not on very many covers posing, but man, he was put together. And here he is against Hogan, who got all the credit, but I would take a body like Kevin's any day over Hogan's. Just way more chiseled, more natural look. His brother Kerry on his very first magazine cover, quite the size here, as he would see later on as he gains another 60 pounds and becomes the heavyweight champion of the world on PWI. Great shot of Kerry here with his biceps down to his abs, totally shredded up to the chest. Wrestling All-Stars, October 84, got a great shot of him. He'd be on several covers as the champion. He'd be on more covers as the champion for the shortest amount of time of holding it than anyone else. Billy Jack, who was also jacked, and them two were on the cover of several magazines together. Kevin Sullivan, even bodybuilding at the time. Him and Mark Lewin were good friends and bodybuilded together. And before he let his body go in like the early 90s, late 80s, Kevin Sullivan was really put together. Here he is again with Billy Jack. Billy Jack was built like another Greek god, had the total package with muscles and with Kerry Von Erich, one of the best covers if you love wrestling, Musclemen. These two, you don't get much better than that, showing their biceps. Billy Jack, the Florida champion, and Kerry. I mean, what a difference Kerry is, right? From when we just looked at to now. I mean, he's just enormous just 3 years later. Billy Jack went on, had a great career in Portland and also in Florida. Had a short run in Crockett NWA before going to the WWF, and things kind of changed for him. There's a first shot of Woman with Kevin Sullivan's wife, Nancy Benoit, of course. Early shot of her, I'm trying to find this date, June of 1984, and that'll be Billy Jack's first cover. He would have some great matches with Superstar Graham in Florida. These are some Grapevine, Florida programs of Billy Jack training in Florida, and he would lose that Florida title to Superstar, and him and Superstar would be on almost every major magazine with that feud in '84. I loved it. The summer of '84, spring of '84, when that feud took place, it was just great. Superstar was back. He was huge. And we just got Championship Wrestling from Florida on television here in New York, and it was just great to see all that. It was my first exposure to those guys in Florida, and I was a Superstar Graham favorite, and just seeing him there, big and as being a champion again was just really a thrill. Here's your only shot, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, who was without a doubt the total package. Not the biggest biceps, but the overall shredded body from the chest up. You didn't get much better than that. He was put together and tightly wrapped. October of '86 Sports Review. Now we're getting later on. Everyone was kind of getting ready to jump on the Sauce bandwagon, but just before that in '84. Nikita Koloff comes to the scene, and when he first debuted, my God, this dude was enormous, man. He would be built really good for a number of years, and his body size would change. He would get a lot smaller, and he would never be the same. He would turn to face and not have the same size or the same draw appeal as he once did. But early on, Nikita Koloff, without a doubt, was a Russian monster. Played the perfect part. Really took the gimmick serious, maybe too serious at times. Wrestling Power, July of '87. This was in the Meadowlands versus the Fabulous Ones. He had a great war with Magnum TA, forming the Superpowers with Dusty Rhodes on PWI, winning the U.S. title. And late '87, early '88, Nikita Koloff would start feuding with Lex Luger. Lex Luger, the total package. Quite small here, but shredded and built. I say small compared to what he would turn out to be later on. Everyone knows Lex Luger. Everyone knows how things turned out because wrestling was all on TV, every cable channel, and he was pretty much a household name throughout the NWA with Lex appeal on PWI. And here he is, late 80s, early 90s. Lex Luger, enormous. Quite different from here to here, wouldn't you say? I mean, my God, look at the size of this dude. And of course, not since the Crusher and the Bruiser had a more powerful, devastating tag team come along as the Road Warriors. And we all know the Road Warriors, and we all know '85 passed, things changed, and every single wrestler was jacked beyond belief. And if you weren't a wrestler, which really kind of sucked. At least that's how it was in the Northeast for the most part, after the territories had closed. Here's an early shot of the Road Warriors, big and strong looking, again on the cover of PWI. And again, a little bit later on in their careers in '85 as AWA champs, Hawk was chiseled, ripped, and huge, and Animal was just huge. And here is just a rare, I'll have to hold it out to show the whole thing, a rare shot of Animal and Hawk on a Japanese wrestling magazine that I had framed, that I kind of hang on my wall. But you could just see the size of these dudes, man. Enormous. If I could just kind of get close on Hawk there at his chest and triceps, and the same with Animal, and just massive dudes. They'd be more ripped off than anybody with the makeup and the muscles, and that kind of became a thing for a good 10 years until things changed again. But this is wrestling's Musclemen. We took a nice look back on some of the biggest guys, some of the strongest guys, and some guys maybe you never heard of before. And these are some of my favorites growing up, reading about and watching as a kid. So I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. All right, man, we'll see you guys on the next one.